Okay, for people joining this live stream this morning, we are talking about Wikidata data, hook up to Wikidata and connecting to our entity system and other things. Okay, so where had we reached last time? We were talking about, okay, so I still need to do this. Okay, so with external identifier, well, should I look at the design first? Because what we discussed is that this would be, it's not the Wikidata ID, this is simply the Wikidata service, and that is its description, right? For this entity, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so let's take a look here. Is Billy with us here?
Yep, hello.
Hi. Okay. Oh, I see. That's an interesting idea. So you're proposing, well, we lost all the colons now. That wasn't what I had in mind. But you're suggesting it's a service name followed by, why would we have, I'm confused here. Oh, it's property identifier. Okay, so this is an entity type. But why is that? What is the, I don't understand what the entity type is here. For Wikidata, does it have an entity type descriptor?
In the Wikidata case, it would just be Wikidata.
So it would just say Wikidata, and then it would say the name of the thing. Is
Yes.
that correct? Okay, and what's the artist deal there?
MusicBrainz has various identifier types, and other services do that too. And in MusicBrainz case, there are 10, like MusicBrainz work, recording, album, and so on.
So
can I just add, is it just sort of a convenient coincidence in this case that the MusicBrainz services happen to correspond to things that we would think of as entity types, but other identifier types may have different services that don't necessarily correspond?
Yeah, I was going to ask the same question.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's correct. And this might be somewhat subjective how this is done. So for each service, we would have to study what the best system would be in that case.
Well, hold on. To me, using the capital letter thing there would indicate that there's some kind of alignment with our built-in entities. But I mean, my suggestion would be that that's the way that we would indicate that this is, well, I don't even know if that's true. I mean, that this is a MusicBrainz artist that is aligned with our artist built-in entity. Is that what
No.
you have in mind? That's hopeless, you're saying. Is that right?
I think so. I mean, we don't have the entirety of MusicBrainz in our system.
Fair enough. Then I have to say, I think what we should do, I like the idea of lowercasing it to make it less definitive, okay? And just having the lowercase service name, generally Wikidata : and then whatever it is. And you know, this case where there are three things spaced out, I wouldn't be horrified by just a colon between each of these: Wikidata : books, Google Books ID : whatever. Isn't that would follow our current convention in terms of how we're doing entity type stuff, right? If I do, oh no,
I'm
we
afraid
do.
to say we don't have colons, because then
Okay, well, so I'm wrong.
case.
So I'm wrong.
But
okay, fine. I'm wrong. Okay, so this doesn't. Okay, so I like your idea that we would go kind of, you know, name of service followed by, yeah, I mean, I think this is fine. Just get rid of the artist word, or if there has to be an artist, have it be lowercase there, MusicBrainz artist, and then the Beatle.
Yeah.
It's simple, and I think by prefixing it that way, we're kind of making it clear that it's some kind of thing that's deep inside some other creature. And if it has to be an ID, then it would just say, it would either say Wikidata, and then it would give the description, the label, or it would say Wikidata ID, and then it's just the ID, if there isn't a description. Does that make sense?
So we discussed it for a moment, and we're not sure whether we want this ID there, because if you see in a scientific article it's citing a DOI, it doesn't report after that ID. No, it just gives the ID, the actual.
No, I understand that. I understand. I'm saying, okay, so I see. So you're saying DOI might be an example where you just give the DOI.
Yes.
Right? But if the DOI, okay, so the real point is, if there is a description of the article, look, I think DOI is an ISBN are both cases where I could argue that we should actually always expose the actual identifier, because their story is that they're identifiers. You understand what I'm saying? So that what we do with the DOI,
but many of them are not given away yet.
I understand that. I understand that. So if what we said was DOI, and then whatever it is, some number, and then paren, and then the label if there is one, or something like that. But so something like DOI or ISBN, in a sense, the number is the story. It is an ID, whereas Wikidata, we are talking about pointing to an entity. If that makes sense.
I'm not sure I see this distinction that clear.
Well, it's because people quote DOIs. They don't quote Wikidata. No humans quote DOIs. They print them in papers and stuff like this. Whereas humans don't quote Wikidata IDs.
Because it's too new.
No, they won't. No, they won't. Just like I wouldn't expect people to quote our internal IDs for entities. They'll simply point to the entity in some computer pulled form in a notebook or something like that, and they won't expose it. I mean, I think the whole point of a DOI, as its name suggests, it has the word identifier in it. ISBN has the word number in it. So my criterion would be, what's that?
Okay, that means so we could curate. In which case do we think it's more the identifier thing that's important, and in which case?
That's what I'm suggesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm suggesting that it is like Music Brains may even have an ID, or an ORCID, for example, has an ID. It is an ID. Its main event is its ID. And it could have that's John Smith type thing for an ORCID. But its main thing is that there's an ID.
And Music Brains, what would that be?
I don't know, because I don't know enough about the structure of that. If there's a Music Brains ID, if it's an ID, then I think in the case of Music Brains, this case where it's Music Brains artist and it has a label, the Beatles, then I think that's what we use. If on the other hand, it's an unnamed, if it's Prince with an unprintable character and it's only by by its UUID, then we got to give Music Brains, artist ID, and then we give what it is. That would be my suggestion. In other words, so most of the time, what you would see, okay, the things which are primarily IDs, as opposed to primarily content, would expose their IDs, right? So in other words, it would be ISBN, blah, 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 blah. And then if we know what it is, we say paren, I don't know what it is, Gone with the Wind or something, right? If we don't know what it is, then we just leave the ISBN. And as Michael says, there are unallocated ISBNs, which we can just treat as raw ISBNs.
Right, there's no other choice.
Right.
There's a little bit also the opposite, like at least theoretically services where there is not a predetermined fixed number of their, in quote, IDs, where you can send anything, like INCHI keys.
Mm-hmm. Well, I understand. That's the difference between entities and things like molecules, which we don't consider to be, we consider notable ones to be entities, and then there's a whole zoo of other ones. Now, external identifier seems to me, okay, so the issue is this. At what point, so you type in random garbage for an external identifier, for one of these ones that has, even Wikidata or any of these, where there's a, let's say you make up a UUID for Music Brains, and it's a UUID that doesn't exist. At what point is that determined?
When you make a request to that service.
Okay, so otherwise it can sit there as a symbolic, here's this random ISBN that hasn't been allocated yet.
Correct.
Well, it seems reasonable to me. I mean, there might be a way. I mean, I could imagine like for these, there's a server transaction that determines whether we know about that entity. In these cases, we might want something that checks, does the entity exist? Right, and it's possible that you type in an ISBN. Okay, let's say you type in an ISBN. How does it resolve what the name of the book is to put it into the entity?
You would have to write a service that does that for you.
I would argue that what we should do is this. Okay, you enter one of these things. It tries to do a server transaction. It tries to resolve it. If it can, it indicates that it's resolved. Otherwise, it has some indication that it didn't resolve.
I agreed we should have this functionality, but it should not be the default behavior.
Why?
Because you might want to process 1 million of them for some reason, and you're not interested in this additional information. And it's costly to get it.
Thinking. Maybe we can have an option to external identifier that says don't bother to get it, because I think that's the unusual case. In other words, if we say external identifier, delayed or something, then it just sits there and you can manipulate it and it only resolves when it has to. Otherwise, it tries to resolve and give you a nice print form.
But on the other hand, usually a function returns them, and the assumption is that the function does the right thing. And then you continue to use them. So it would be a waste to do something if you already know they're valid.
No. Once we know they're valid, we can tag them as valid. I don't know how, but
I feel like the information stream that you just mentioned that you want mostly as the display one, I would mostly like it as a computational part of a data set.
You mean when we compute common name or something? My concern is when the thing is, okay, so you say when it's generated programmatically, it's going to come back resolved.
Unresolved.
Correct? What's that?
Unresolved.
No, resolved, as in when you compute it by doing some kind of Wikidata search or something, it's going to come back as a resolved thing. The only case where it isn't is if you say, let me probe the space of ISBNs and see what's been allocated, right? But in that sense of programmatic generation, it would not be resolved by, from the start.
Right. Like, let's take DOIs. You might have some BibTeX files with tens of thousands of things, and you want to process this BibTeX files, so you don't want for each of them to go out and get it, because you might be interested.
I understand. So what function could get it? I mean, we could have...
But there are two things: get it and add it into the thing for nice formatting, and get it as a data set with the raw information.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take a look for services other than... Okay, for external identifier, what are we expecting the services associated with external identifier to be in general? Do you understand what I'm asking? You've got an external identifier. Tony, you understand the question?
No.
Okay, well, let me repeat it, okay? You've got an external identifier. There's certain questions you can ask about that external identifier. There are things you can do with the external identifier, right? Am I making sense?
They could have static properties, yeah.
Well, no, they could have, okay, but they could have dynamic properties. That is, if you want to do a lookup on something, how do you do the lookup? Let's say the external identifier is an ISBN, and you want to find who the publisher was. No, that's a bad example because it's coded in the ISBN. But let's say
we need another function for that, right? I mean, that's why we have something like WikidataData, that it can work with Wikidata external identifiers.
Fine.
You want to have external identifier magically also have a bunch of other service
I don't know.
lookups
I mean,
built into it.
I'm asking the question, just like we have services which have certain service requests built in, maybe with external identifiers, given an external identifier, there are certain obvious requests you can make that go beyond the pure, these ones here.
I would say the reverse. Instead of external identifier doing the work, I think its existence should be propagated to existing services so that more and more services start understanding them. So the external identifier should itself be very lightweight.
Well, fair enough, but the services are entity value, basically.
What about information?
Yeah, that's a possibility that could do something with this, just like it does with ours. Exactly. I agree that's interesting. Yeah, I agree that's interesting. But let's understand in terms of what are we calling them? External identifier services or something? What are we calling? We've got a list of external services that's part of the Service Connect framework. What are we calling the things which are, like MusicBrainz and DOIs and so on?
I would call them after the service followed by data, like MusicBrainz data, DOI.
No. You're not understanding my question.
Isn't that dollar external identifier types returns that list? External identifier types is the list.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Yeah.
Fine. So then there would be a guide page called external identifier types, right?
Right.
And on that guide page, okay, great. So for each of these, we would list, just like we do for our entities, we would list a certain set of properties, right? So these would be pages similar to an entity type page. External identifier type would have a documentation page like an entity type, right?
And by properties, you mean it in the sense of subvalues?
Probably subvalues, but or entity value properties. But I mean things that you can.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just asking how structurally you call for them.
I would say subvalues. And then, in other words, here, for instance, an ISSN, I don't know what, so information of, okay, so first we have, is there a wrapper? For entity types, there is no wrapper. It's simply, oh, I see. So the obvious thing to do, just like entity, just like we can just say entity of city, right? And that represents city entities, if I'm not mistaken, right? We could say external identifier of ISSN, and then we can say information of that. Does information of this give the properties?
Not that I know.
Okay, probably should. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if we want to use just the entity wrapper to represent a type.
Right.
I'm not sure we have formally reviewed that design.
Okay, I think it's probably a sensible idea. And then we can use external identifier to similarly represent that external identifier type. And then we can use information on it to get properties.
Yes. So what would be typical properties apart from those static ones?
I haven't a clue. I mean, I don't know. It depends what's in these databases. I don't know. ISSN, it's probably, the city where the periodical is published, the year it was first published, the name of the registrant, the link to its website. I don't know. I mean, all the usual kinds of things. Right? I mean,
so it would basically be the type metadata. Yeah. Historical.
I don't know whether it's metadata. I mean, it depends what it is, right? I mean, just like in the case of Wikidata, you've got a full, sparkle animal, so to speak, right? Where there are different properties associated with different entities. Am I making sense?
Yeah, but that's different. Are we talking about the individual things inside that type or about the type itself?
No, we're talking about the individual things inside the type. Well, okay, the type itself may have certain generic things, just like I'm sure every Wikidata entity has certain generic things you can say about it, right? Every generic ISSN probably has things you can say about it. In the case of Wikidata, it's very diverse what the entities can represent. In the case of ISSN, it's not particularly diverse what the entities can represent. So most of the properties are burnt in and fixed
to
a given.
for instance, a string pattern that this ISSN has to match.
Okay.
Tony, I don't think that's what Stephen is thinking on. Let's take archive. So I think Stephen is thinking on our source, submission date, title, presence of supplementary stuff, and so on.
Right.
For a given article or?
For both.
Yeah.
No, okay, for a given article, it's concrete data, and for the type is what things you can ask about.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Now, obviously, and I hope we're going to have a meeting about this again soon, our own internal type hierarchy stuff, which I hope has been making progress, because I think it's really important, will be somewhat related to these things as well, like person, versus astronaut versus novelist and so on. Am I making sense? Yes, Tony?
Yes.
Has that been making progress?
Very small preliminary work, but
okay, we need to
concrete yet.
Start the engines on that, because that's an important thing.
One interesting thing that came out of that is that we now have a list of general properties. That means properties that apply to more than one type. And we can use those properties in the second argument of Wikidata data, say area, which is something that applies to 10 or 20 different types.
Okay, fine. But that's all well and good, but I'm more concerned about getting our own knowledge base, with the correct hierarchical information that I am in trying to, dig through the mess that's in Wikidata and so on.
Yeah.
Am I making sense?
And also this alignment of types, properties, and entities with Wikidata helps to show where are the gaps in the ontologies.
Enough. Fine. Okay. All right. So let's go back here. I think we're agreeing then that what's going to happen is we're going to have we're going to have a page for each external identifier type that is analogous to an entity page that lists certain generic properties and as far as possible, specific properties. Although in the case of something like Wikidata, the specific properties will vary from individual entity to individual entity. Am I making sense?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. And then we support something like association and data set if you want all at once.
Exactly. And that would be something that we would support generically for an external identifier. That and information should probably work as well, just like it does for, in the same way as it does for a built-in entity.
And as Tony has brought up the last time, where do we specify where to get it in case there are multiple providers of this data? That might not be 100% mutually consistent.
Yeah, I understand that. I would think it was in the external identifier itself, some kind of method option, or you could put it in the or you could put a method option in the entity value, basically.
But for a sub-value call, that's a little bit ugly.
Put the method in the sub-value, if you really have to have it.
So basically, archive, open, close, title, comma, method goes to original Los Alamos server.
Or something, I would think. I mean, do we think of a better way to do it? I mean, okay, so look, what this is, the question is, how much are people going to want to change this? Right? I mean, and why would you change it?
It could be a system option that in the system option.
Well, exactly. But I mean, but what we're going to have is a system servers. Remember, we've got system servers which say which geo server you're using and all kinds of stuff like that. I would say that when we can put it in a method option, we should, but the default for the method option is some kind of system server setting, and that in cases where you're trying to use an elided sub-value, it's just going to go to the default.
I agree.
Okay. So, we put a method option in when we can, but the default for that method option is set by system server setting. So by the way, just to connect things, I don't know whether service connections have that same issue of a default service. It's a question. Certainly integrated services do. Like, for example, in the case of
Service connections are all only, they're one-to-one. Like there's only one
okay,
underlying
fine.
service.
Fine. They are specifically connection to a service.
To a service, yes.
Right. Okay, fair enough. So then what we are dealing with here is more like the integrated services, like web search and so on, which has different method options.
Right. We have a we identify a default, but the user can specify one or the other. Yeah.
So one issue is Brad Ashby is inventorying the system servers thing, and we should make sure he is aware of that as another setting for system servers is what the integrated services are using by default, and then what the external identifier types are using by default.
Right.
Seem reasonable? I mean,
yeah.
It will increase his list of system servers, but I told him it was going to get long. I mean, here's a bunch more. Okay. All right. So let's take a look then. So graphic design-wise, we seem to be settled. Is that true? We'll be using lowercase.
Refresh.
What's that?
You could also hit refresh, and those should be lowercase.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of spacing here, I don't know why the artist is so spaced out from the music brains. I just have it be a regular space, and then I think go ahead.
Should it be lowercase, the artist? I mean, completely.
Yes, because it has no. It is not. The only things that get uppercased would be our built-in entity types. I would suggest.
Yeah.
Okay.
So don't even caps the first letter.
No. The first whatever. Look, archive wouldn't cap the first letter because it isn't capped, except it will be capped in our, standard name.
That's fixed already in the source. Yeah.
Okay, fine. But this is a human name, which would be whatever weird decoration they have for their names. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
And whether we cap the A for artist, I don't know, but I think it probably looks better to do that. Anybody got an opinion about that?
I prefer lowercase.
Okay. Do you have an argument for why?
It's similar to properties where we always use the sentence case.
Okay, fine. Okay, but then the word ID, I mean, that's wrong. It should be capital I, capital E, I would think.
Yes.
Kind of, unless it's gone id in.
Yeah.
I think that's a
weird
visual bug on my end.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Fine. Okay.
So we all just follow basically what capitalize would do in general.
I think in other words, it's unless the thing is a branded name with multiple words, which some of them will be, like the Library of Congress, I suspect, however that capitalizes.
Yes.
And in other words, if it's a branded name like Authority ID, I mean, if that was a brand, you might cap it. If it is just a description, you don't cap it.
Yes, CAS registry number is capital.
Fine. Okay. All right. Okay, good. Now, in terms of the hover behavior and so on,
it might be that. Well, I'll just let you finish your thought. Sorry.
Well, I was just okay. No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, I think it's something that maybe Tony could move forward with, and then after interacting with it, we could maybe change our mind afterward. But unless there's something like bigger that you were thinking of changing.
No, I think this is why is the greater than not present in the input here? In other words, if we know how to get to it, why aren't we? Oh, I see. On hover, it shows the greater than. Great. That's the right thing. Yeah, and shows the URL you're going to go to.
Yeah.
I'm good with that. Any problems, anybody?
Sounds good.
Okay. Coyote Goat on our live stream is asking, why can't all these external data sources be baked into the existing entity framework? Trust me, we are spending decades trying to do that when they make sense. But it's a jungle out there, and we want to give people access to the jungle, even though there have been no roads built through it. Now, that's not what you're supposed to say anymore about jungles, but anyway, you get the idea. So this is, this is access to the raw jungle. and we are doing our best to connect the jungle. We don't necessarily believe in everything that's in the jungle. So some of it may be complete nonsense. And, we are doing our best to curate everything ourselves, but that's a separate problem. Okay. Generic properties. Okay, Atom Fighter is pointing out generic properties are called preamble inside media files. I don't think preamble is really the right term for what we are now. I mean, we're just using it as an internal name, generic properties. I don't think that will ever be exposed. But we will list out certain things. Properties always available include blah, blah, blah. Right? What is the metadata association? What is that? What is that?
That's where the label and description live.
I see. There. But I don't understand. What if you provide a label and description and they have nothing to do with the ones that were in the underlying service?
I think that's fine.
So it overrides.
Yeah, you can simply replace them. Yeah.
Okay, so it should say here, other expressions like integers are also supported for certain services, for certain external identifier types, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then what you're saying there is that meta overrides the built-in ones, which will affect display and will affect subvalues specifically asked of the entity of the external identifier, correct? So it could be a pretty confusing situation that you say metadata, you call it a metadata, you say an elephant is really a rhinoceros in the metadata. In other words, the entity, the external object that is an elephant in Wikidata, you are rhinocerizing by giving its label as rhinoceros. Is that correct?
Yes.
But you could make an up value on pi to say that its n value is 3.
Sure, I understand. Right, I mean, and I understand, it's a programmable system. Okay, let's take a look down at some of these things. The identifier, what does that mean, the identifier system? Shall I edit this page? I mean, this should surely be called, I mean, I think, should we call it type? Well, the external identifier type is what this is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so other expressions like integers are supported for certain external identifier types.
In the usage message, we have identifier system type. I'm changing that too, or?
Oh, yeah. Represents a resource identified by ID in the external identifier. Well, I mean, that's probably okay. In the external identifier system type. Associates the metadata given by the association meta with this instance of the external identifier object, right? Because it's just, you could have one is a rhinoceros, one is a tiger, right? You could have both the elephants underneath, but one is dressed as a rhinoceros and one is dressed as a tiger, correct?
Yes.
I feel like that's more of a details section thing.
It is, yes.
So just in the sentence at meta.
Well, this isn't perfect. Okay, let's not deal with.
It is similar to image, which can have metadata included in.
I know, but that's given by meta information arrow.
Yes, so there was an open question whether we should include the meta information using the option or whether it should be an argument.
I'm not sure. I don't know how common this will be to overwrite the existing metadata.
I think while identifiers are supposed to be stable, the labels can change now and then if data improves. So that
adds
might
the
be
metadata meta to this instance. Oh, wrong thing.
Yeah, that's
okay.
better.
Okay, all right. Now down here, I don't understand. Okay, type. Okay, the raw. So I think this should be external ID.
Isn't it repeating somehow the word external from the symbol
maybe
name?
so. All right, okay. Well, but you can't override that. Whereas you can override the label, right? You see what I'm saying? And I think
But
you should be able to say here, see, that's not right, because here what you want to say is you want to have something that says external label, because you might want to get the underlying label. Or is there not an underlying label? What is the underlying label?
the only label that is there is the one that's embedded in meta.
Okay, but so then I don't understand that. What's it going to display? It's going to display something from the description field?
It's going to display label if available and the ID otherwise.
No, that's not correct. Because in Wikidata, there may be a description that you're going to use or to display the result. See what I'm saying? You're not saying Q2, you're saying Earth. Am I making sense?
But only if the label has been embedded.
No, no. You mean, oh, wait a minute.
I think we speak about two scenarios, where the thing gets returned or where the thing gets put in. I think, Stephen, you think in the case where it comes back from something. Tony think somebody types it manually from the beginning.
Okay. Okay, so includes the metadata given by the association to this instance, okay? So that means it could come back. I don't understand what you're doing here. I don't understand this.
So when
okay, I don't understand. This is a muddle.
Yeah, let's say when Wikidata is asked about the children of Albert Einstein, then some external identifiers are coming back, and for convenience, they include the labels that were specified at that point in time for the returned IDs.
Okay, how do you change those labels? In other words, if you want to, you're telling me, so that meta thing, I don't think this is right. I think that should be in some option. Okay, you're saying you just want to carry it around in the symbolic object just so it's easy to format. So it doesn't have to do any kind of server transaction or something to format, correct?
Exactly.
Okay, but how do we do that for our current entities?
They
don't we cache
store
it?
it? Yes, and it's cached, and it requires server calls.
No. It requires one server call, as this does. Right? It requires one server call when the external identifier, or in our case, the entity, is generated.
One per entity. If you have
That's
multiple
correct.
entity, multiple server calls.
Yeah. Right.
But that's, I think, what Tony had in mind.
So what you have here is a muddle, because what you've got is something where you could type it in, you could dress the elephant in a tiger's clothing, that could come back from you don't know where it's coming from, you don't know what it is. Right? So, okay, if what you are doing is saying that meta thing is additional information, that how can that stuff be used? It can be used for computation as well. It's essentially a local override of a server call. But let's say you want to redo the server call. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Right. So you want to redo it. So it says, so somebody put the tiger in there, but you think it's wrong. So you want to redo it and reassign labels based on what was actually in the external service database.
Yes.
How do you do that?
So there was a function in the initial design that was called Wikidata update meta information.
No. We do not want something like that. That is a total mess. Okay, we got to think through how to do it. Right? That's not the answer. Right? So what you're doing here, okay, so you've got, okay, so let's just think for a second. So this is a cached piece of information that is stored here. And something needs to potentially update that cache, right?
Not quite. If the user wants. I don't think that should be done automatically.
No, I understand. I understand that. But I think, but the trouble is you don't know whether that came from, in other words, certain properties, upon generation of an external identifier, which properties will be exposed in the metadata that returns when the external identifier is generated. Do you understand the question? Which of these will you choose to put in there when you
Only
generate
two,
the elephant?
Yeah. A label and a description for disambiguation.
Not the URL, for example.
The URL is something that can be generated given the type and the ID.
Okay. All right. So then we got to say normally meta comes back with the label and the description. Is that correct? What's the difference between the label and the description?
The label would be something like Albert Einstein, and description would be physicist or movie or whatever.
No, well, no. Then that's okay.
But it depends. Yeah. It depends on the service, and Wikidata chooses to return label and description by default. Other services might.
So I don't think this is the right way to do it. I think what we should do is to be explicit about what that meta contains, and to say something like display name. What do we call it in Entity Store? What do we call the displayed name? Okay, that's the displayed name. Label means the displayed name, right?
Yes.
Okay, so then description is very obscure. So what would that be in the case of an entity store? What is the analog of description?
A user can define that property, but nothing particular happens with it.
Okay, all right. So what do we think it really is here? Is it a description could be a giant paragraph about the life and times of your particular favorite tiger, right?
Well, but typically a sentence long. So the two terms label and description are not typical to are not just used in Wikidata, but are common in different ontologies and meta ontologies, like scores. So
all right. So this is displayed name, and description is brief description.
Yes, mostly for disambiguation. Yeah.
Well, it might be for disambiguation, in which case it'll just say physicist. It could say, inventor of relativity or something.
Yes.
Which is it?
Physicists are known for, and so on. So it can be
okay.
Longer
Wait a second. So it isn't merely a disambiguation, or perhaps it is because it's John Smith, resident of wherever.
Yeah. So the minimal thing that it should do is disambiguate, but usually does a little bit more.
Okay, but you're saying we have no control over it. That is, it is a thing. Generally, label and description would come from the external source of the external identifier.
Yes.
But you could overwrite them if you really wanted to.
Exactly.
Sorry. I have to make this point again. I think we are thinking too much on the scenario where this stuff comes back from something. I actually think a fair number of usage will be people do them locally. Like what I said earlier, you have 1,000 BibTeX files that you analyze. So you read them all in and build them yourself.
Okay, so what are you saying? So you're saying we have to have something that goes out, and so you could type in label and description.
Exactly. I feel like that's a common scenario. It's not a rare
Okay,
scenario.
fine. But
Yeah,
then what happens when if you feed this thing in? Okay, so then you need something, as you say, that resolves the external identifier, updating its label and description.
right. That's why I was saying earlier, we need a function that operates on and changes the thing.
Okay. Okay, so in the case of Wikidata data, arguably that could be the one argument form.
Correct.
Wikidata data of the external identifier.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, so arguably then what we should do is we should have a thing called external identifier data, perhaps, which could be the non-subvalue form of, that could be a form that isn't a subvalue and contains method options and God knows what else, which has an elided form, which is the subvalue. And it could have a one argument form that simply returns the processed external identifier. Does that make sense?
Yes. Potentially with the service as the first argument.
I don't think so. I really don't think so.
No.
I think it's a detail, and I think and I think again it will default from the system servers list. Okay, I like this. This is good.
Yeah, me too.
By the way,
this would basically, like, if you call this, it throws away existing stuff and gets all new one.
Exactly.
And if the service says less, then bad luck, you lose something.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the generic form here. And if you called that on a Wikidata thing, it would do the Wikidata thing. Okay. Okay. All right, I'm good with those things there. By the way, I have to go in a few minutes, and I think Michael does as well.
Yes, I was going to remind you in 2 minutes.
Okay. I like this. This is good. Okay.
Those are small but very useful improvements to our symbolic sparkle.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I think we're good to go then. I mean, we should look at this a little bit more, but I think we're good to go in terms of how this works, right? I think I need to play with it a little bit in Wikidata search max items. All right. So here, if I say max items 10, okay, so what happened here? Wikidata ID Amazon? What the heck is that? Somebody is playing games there.
No,
but that's okay.
there really are fairy chess pieces with strange names like antelope and elephant and giraffe.
Okay, well, why is this one?
I don't know why the label is
search.
Amazon.
Yeah, but why is it picked up?
It's
with
probably
search
called an
elephant?
elephant. It probably has multiple names, and this piece is called an elephant because it hops over 2 spaces, or I don't know. I've not heard of it.
Okay, so wait a minute. So the URL here. So this is what we would be giving. I don't understand then. That you've said over there that you're going to give something which is a URL that you can go to, whereas this is giving an external identifier symbolic form. So which is it?
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay, over here there is a canonical URL that you can go to in Wikidata to see what it means, right?
Yes.
But what we're doing on the rollover here, on the hover, is we're giving the symbolic form, right?
Yeah,
what Billy had said.
It's not implemented yet. We just finished it an hour ago.
I understand that. But in Billy's version, the new design is showing the URL as opposed to our symbolic form.
Yes.
Okay, so which is it?
I think once you go over the label, which is a link, you see the link tooltip. But if you go over other places, you could see the input form.
I think that's super confusing.
So instead of a link hand, it would be an arrow cursor or just a standard text cursor because you're about to make a highlight and you happen to be over something that doesn't have a link, but it does have information.
I don't see why this is any more the link than anything else.
Because I guess we should not lose the ability to see the actual ID.
I agree. But so maybe what we want to do is to have the hover. So the question is, do you really need to show the URL?
I think you
Or
see
could
that
we
already
just
in
say,
the at the bottom of the notebook. There's already an indication where it will go.
What bottom of which notebook?
So if you go over the Amazon thing,
in the status
over the label,
area?
yes, the status area shows the link.
Oh.
Well, then that's fine. Then what we want to do is this, and we want to indicate in here that this, so then this highlights with a greater than, and shows this as a rollover. Okay, and we're good.
Yeah.
Understand what I'm saying? So in other words, the rollover, the hover tooltip would be the symbolic description, which is useful, I think. Okay, the symbolic thing there.
Yes.
Honestly, the most useful thing there is probably, well, we can give both of them. We can give all of it for the time being. Yes, that's fine. That's fine. And then it comes up with a greater than sign, although I don't understand how that works without everything jumping. Does it
That's why in the hover in the design document includes the ellipsis at the end. It sort of chops it off.
That's not going to work. When it's a word like elephant, it's not going to work to do that. So I don't know where you want to put the greater than then. We've also had
1 minute, Stephen. 1 minute till your next meeting.
All right. Okay. I got to go. See you guys soon.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.